Hello, social media followers, LinkedIn, Facebook, and everyone tuning into our show. Welcome to Beyond the Offer podcast. I am your host, Bill Gates, joined by my co-host and friend, Rosanna Snediker. Thank you for tuning in as we tackle the latest trends in talent acquisition and human resources. We are very excited and welcome to have Daina Gjemre as our guest today. Currently, Daina is the head of human resources at Renovo Solutions, which is a healthcare and life sciences equipment and technology company, which is owned by a private equity company called Water Street Healthcare Partners. That was a mouthful. Daina has an exciting career in HR over the past 20 years. She's led HR at companies like FCB Global, ST Residential, HBR Consulting as well. I've known Daina for roughly about 8 years. We're certainly lucky to have helped you find a job and helped fill some roles on your team, but we are thrilled to have you. Welcome to Beyond the Offer, Daina.
Great. Thanks, Phil. Glad to be here.
So jumping into it, I know a lot about you and whatnot, but for more of our listeners, tell us a little bit more about your background, how you got into HR, especially after getting a degree in journalism from Indiana.
Yeah, so we're going way back. I think, starting at IU in college, I had a passion for writing and journalism and actually advertising. So my first job was at a big agency here in Chicago, it was at FCB. So I started in client service and the company actually went through a merger. So it's a bit of happenstance how I ended up in HR, like a lot of people, I think. But it was an exciting opportunity to help merge the two companies internally and kind of flip the script on who my clients were. So when that came across my desk, I thought that was a unique way to change my career path. And when I interviewed for it, I really liked the team, liked the boss, liked the type of work that we were going to do, and didn't really, think twice about it. So at that time, I hopped into HR and I never looked back. So it wasn't anything I planned for, obviously, during my college years, but it was a right decision at a young age, or I just didn't know. I didn't think too much about it because I was like in my 20s and who cares, right?
For sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, in your role, a little bit more like flashing forward to your role now at Renovo Solution, tell us a little bit more about, what the company does, what your role is internally, and how has it kind of evolved and changed since you started?
Yeah. So yeah, as you shared, Renovo Solutions is a healthcare technology management company for hospitals, various medical facilities, and then also laboratory and life sciences companies. So our employees have a really fascinating, interesting role of servicing all the equipment, machinery, very important types of machines and modalities and different things for the healthcare industry. So it's a very cool niche industry that's everywhere at every type of medical facility you could think about. So my role with Renovo is to lead the HR function for the company. So I was able to come in, thanks to you, Bill, for presenting the role to me a year and a half ago, and really assess the lay of the land for the growing company and then build my team and the strategy around it for the expected growth that we're having.
Absolutely. So basically, is Renovo from what I gather, you provide medical equipment fixing services essentially within, whether it's hospitals, could be physicians' offices, things like that. Is that correct?
Yeah, anything to keep all the machines running. So preventative maintenance, capital planning, types of exercises for hospitals. There's massive, massive amounts of equipment and work that goes around how the hospital facilities operate. And we help a lot with that with the hospital operations teams.
Absolutely. Has there been a good amount of growth since you joined overall, whether it's acquisition or organic growth?
Yeah, we've been through one acquisition last year, and then there was an acquisition right before I came in. So the company added through those two about 200 employees. So that's about 45% growth in the past 2 to 3, probably going on 3 years now. So we have added a lot of employees through acquisition.
Good.
Nice.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and with that growth and being the head of HR, how do you prepare to have enough HR talent on your team specifically to handle the business growth and just as the company grows? What's your strategy there?
Sure. I think as best as you can, just trying to peek around the corner and understand what's coming your way. Usually with acquisitions, you do have a bit of a runway. So you're involved in the due diligence and you know what's coming a few months down the line if the deal is going to close or not. So you can kind of plan and also understand the new company, like what their resources are. So they may have their own team, or they may have one or two people over there. So you can kind of think about how you integrate that. Or if they have nothing, you just have to figure out what's the right structure to fold them in, and if you need additional headcount, and what those roles could look like just based on the needs of the business. So it's a bit of a art and a science, I guess, but probably you want to do it when you know what the actual workload will be and you understand the capacity after the company's folded in, I would guess.
Yep.
That's just a normal thing we've noticed within a lot of organizations that are continuously being acquired by private equity. But I don't think is this your first stint within the PE space, or have you worked with other ones before?
No, I've had a couple other experiences where I've worked with private equity backed companies. So ST Residential was a real estate company backed by private equity. So at that time, it was a smaller organization and I was the sole HR person. So we had to really set up a lot of, basic foundational things and build the company from the resources that we were given through the private equity investors at that time. And then what we kind of carried over from some of the other companies.
Talk to us a little bit about the process. Like, I mean, you're obviously on leading HR, but when a new company, whether the PE firm or whatever, approaches you and says, "Hey, Dana, we've got this company that we're potentially thinking about acquiring," how does that kind of whole process work? I know there's due diligence and things like that, and a lot of times, I mean, maybe not all the time necessarily, but sometimes those acquisitions never go through because X, Y, and Z. But just talk to us a little bit how that kind of process works in evaluating if that organization is worth integrating.
Yeah, sure. Well, there's certainly, the lion's share of that work really happens with the private equity partner, our finance executives, and then our CEO, COO, some of our existing founders. So people that really know the nuts and bolts of the businesses. And then I think HR gets involved when things get a little bit serious down the road, like things are looking promising and that the deal will go through. So typically, when it gets to that stage, you start to get access to some of the data in like a big data room type of situation where everything's dumped in for people to review and look at. So, things like employee files, the benefits plans, the compensation structure, any existing activities with the organization. So that's kind of like the paperwork side. And then you do sometimes get to start meeting with the founders and the leaders of the other organization to start building those relationships, because it's definitely a partnership throughout. So when you're going through due diligence and you're going through the transaction and then you close, you work really, really closely together because you're obviously helping shepherd the employees into the new organization and then also helping them through what's probably a big transition in their eyes and making sure that goes as smoothly as possible.
Once it even does get to you from an HR perspective standpoint, I mean, there's benefits, as you mentioned. How does the leadership integrate, two cultures kind of colliding, et cetera? But are there ever, like, what would be some red flags that say, no thanks, we don't necessarily think this would, where you would advise the rest of the leadership to say, I think we're going to see issues, no matter how great of a financial asset they may or may not be?
Yeah, I mean, there's certainly things that maybe we'd want to talk through. I think probably any major red flags, like you said, would probably be with the value of the deal or the financial side. But I think what HR can bring to the table is just looking at things like any existing litigation policies that are really mismatched that would be expensive. So if they have enormously rich PTO accruals or benefits or, big compensation plans that maybe you don't have, hopefully that's not the case, but then you'd want to just make sure that that's all accounted for in the deal. Or if you're bringing people over, that you're making folks whole if it's the other way around or something like that. So those would be some of the areas where you'd want to call attention to. So everything's planned for.
How about when the company actually integrates itself, right? So they're bringing on the organization. I'm assuming during that time you may determine, do they operate independently? Do you integrate leadership to that new organization? How does kind of the reporting and organizational structure work? I mean, from a cultural standpoint, I don't know how often you've necessarily been with one that operates completely siloed and only the CEO and CFO maybe report financials through more of a holding company model, but have you dealt with circumstances to where it doesn't necessarily make sense to integrate with the larger company as a whole?
Yeah, I think it can be very different. It just depends on what you're looking to achieve. And there are certainly benefits to letting the companies run themselves a little bit like they always have, because obviously they're doing well. That's the reason why you wanted to partner with them or purchase them. So some of the things that they're working on, you can kind of keep that status quo. You obviously need a lot of the institutional knowledge. You need people to tell you the lay of the land. And I think, maybe it might come off really heavy handed to just start ripping things out right away. So I think it's kind of a gradual process where you're assessing and just understanding everything under the hood. And then later down the line, I've seen things both ways. You kind of try to do things maybe in the first 90 days to 6 months, maybe things that are low hanging fruit. And then some of the more strategic things or the areas where leadership's involved, that may be a multi-year thing where you're working out what's the right thing for the business.
Yeah. And that's super interesting. I feel like we've seen such an uptick in companies wanting HR professionals to have that experience over the past, what would you say, Bill? Like even like 2 to 3 years, probably 3 to 4 compared to 10 years ago. So it's becoming more and more common for HR professionals to have a strong skill set within M&A and private equity. You've worked with companies that are, owned, like you said, by big, large private equity organizations, and then also potentially just private companies that are held by a board or just a few owners. Are there differences in how you approach human resources and kind of your approach on the large PE firm versus just a small ownership?
I think working with PE and having a board just brings another level of accountability maybe and responsibility. It's definitely a really cool experience. So I'm grateful to have it. Thanks for making me feel special by saying it's like it's an in-demand skill set. I was lucky to fall into that a while back, but I think it's a unique experience because they want the company to do really well. They're obviously putting a lot of resources behind it, and you just have that additional layer of support. So, I mean, in ways, the stakes are maybe a little higher because you have another level to report to and succeed with beyond just your core executive team and those core business goals. But it also can be really cool. And in my experience, it's been a really positive thing to be able to sit in on those meetings, talk about the successes that you're having on the HR front, have another team of people to brainstorm challenges and talk through solutions with and things like that. So, I mean, that's not to say it's always all perfect and it's all about like things that are positive. Like there's certainly challenges, but a lot of, times then you have people and resources to help you out.
Have you noticed cultures change during those times? I mean, whether it's private equity or we've experienced it internally with Hirewell as we've grown, any company's going to change. Like if you move from 50 people to 500 from that standpoint. But have you noticed it more so? Because and we know there's sometimes PE firms that are way more involved than ones that are a bit more, of course, hands off. But notice cultures change and things like that. And is there kind of more turnover than when that actually happens? And how do you handle those circumstances as cultures change?
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's the hardest part, right? When you're acquired. And I think even before I was running the team, a lot of the companies I worked for as a generalist and junior in my career have all been acquired or changed names, or their holding company consolidated them. So I've been through it on the employee front and then also working more, behind the scenes in a role like this. And yeah, it's always a little scary for the employees, and you want to try and do the best you can to keep the good things good and there and establish some type of status quo and be really high touch with communication on where the company's going and what's changing and what's not. But there's always going to be a level of disruption that I think is kind of unavoidable. And you just kind of do your best to manage through it. So I guess I'd have to look back and really to be able to answer exactly if turnover has gone up in my handful of experiences with that. I'm sure a little bit. And, there's probably a lot of reasons for that.
Well, we can shift gears from the PE talk and just a quick question for you. So tax professionals, they've termed, busy season Q1 before April 15th, where it's go, go, go. For HR leaders, we know benefits, open enrollment, which is happening now, compensation changes, performance reviews, sometimes end of the year, mid-year. What would you say is kind of the busiest and most stressful time for HR professionals?
Yeah, I think, Q4 and Q1 are just really busy with everything you just shared. So open enrollment, end of year planning, comp planning, budgeting, things like that. And then just thinking about the programs that you need to kick off in the new year. So yeah, I think it's right now till like the end of winter pretty much is when I feel like it's usually the busiest.
Yeah, for sure. Are there HR tools and technologies that you've been using recently or exposed to that have made your team more effective and automate the process during those stressful times?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of technology resources that are helpful to us. We have a pretty solid analytics platform within our HRIS that we use, which is really nice grab and go reporting, summarizes things in a very nice visual way. There's some members on our team that have good experience with Power BI. And then we have resources internally as well. So, I mean, that's been around for a little bit. I'm not an expert in it, so I'm lucky some other people know it, but that's a really unique resource for various data points. And Renovo is very spread out. So it's helpful for us to have a good pulse on where all of our employees are through technology like that. And then there are some things that we have that are starting to leverage AI more in just basic asking questions within our data to spit out quick answers. So that's kind of helpful. And then, yeah, just leveraging our resources with our brokers and really having good relationships with them so that we get information fast and we have good support to get through the busy times.
Yeah. And a lot of those tools are just changing pretty quickly. So even a year from now, they'll be much more of a benefit to us. So when we talk about recruiting and specifically like entry level hourly recruiting, how has that changed over the past few years for the organizations you've worked for? And just how do you, I guess, go about getting those entry level folks up to speed when you're hiring for those skill sets?
Yeah, we're lucky here at Renovo. We have a proprietary in-house training. So we can take people with very little experience or even no experience and teach them how to get into the biomedical space. So obviously that can be a little bit customer specific if they're able to bring on someone so green. But that actually predates me and my team. So I can't take the credit for that. But that's a really unique thing that we do have to help people learn skills on how to get into the field and be successful at the company. Otherwise, I guess I'd just say some of the basic stuff. So just making sure we have good onboarding. We do 30 and 120-day check-ins to make sure that they have everything that they need. We connect folks with a buddy in the organization so that they have someone that they can talk to and get to know right away and network a little bit. I think all those things are pretty standard, but that's what we do on our side.
Within Renovo, back to kind of going to the entry level hiring, I know a lot of the employees there because they're actually on site within maybe some of those client sites as well. Does that make the onboarding and training aspect and kind of performance and keeping everybody on track more difficult than, say, if you have everybody in one particular office? I would imagine it would be, but what are your thoughts?
Yeah, just how spread out we are.
Yeah, I mean, given the fact you've got, I don't know necessarily how many clients you guys have, but if you have one manager that's overseeing several different locations, and it maybe not just necessarily with Renovo, but having ever since COVID with just remote workforces in general, having touch points and getting people up to speed, it's easier to get lost than, say, if you're old school and you're going in the office 5 days a week. Have you seen that kind of those aspects change? And what are some of the things you've done there to make sure people have the right tools and stay on track and continue to have higher performance?
Sure. I think we really rely a lot on our on-site managers. So I guess Renovo was always remote and really dispersed. So that even predates the pandemic. So we do our best to like get tools and onboarding and training centralized. It's all obviously remote and over the computer. So that's convenient, but it really comes down to the on-site manager just owning that experience, and we do our best to coach them and help them throughout the way. But yeah, it's a challenge because we're in over 40 states. I think our hospital and facility count is over 200 right now. So there may be some teams have 50 employees, some spots have one or two. So it's like, how do you make sure you're getting to those people? And we just have to make sure that we're working, leveraging our managers and the regional leaders to get the tools and resources and messages out.
Yeah, yeah, that can be challenging. I know we got a much better at it after COVID because we were definitely much more of a 5 day a week in the office thing and having the right amount of touch base, but not too many to make sure people still can stay on track and you're not overbearing. But pivoting to more of probably a question you dealing with, which a lot of HR folks are, open enrollment and benefits. How do you best evaluate your company's benefits and making sure you're offering the right thing from medical to 401k, parental leave, and making sure you stay competitive to make it still attractive to come to, Renovo or wherever you're leading HR.
Yeah, we do a lot of benchmarking. So I think formally and informally. So our brokers help us with industry standard rates and packages and things like that. So we have a lot of data around that. I also did through a consultant, just did an overall study on all of our total rewards. So she helped me pull together. I identified our competitors. We looked at PTO, 401k, health benefits, all those different things, and rolled everything up into a report. Because coming into the organization a year and a half ago, I just wanted to get a bit of a lay of the land on where those things were. And that was super helpful and helped us guide some decision making. And then we just ask. So we poach people from our competitors, just like any company. And we'll say, hey, can you give us, do you have your benefits packet from this company? Do you remember their PTO? Do you remember? We try and just stay fresh on that. And our employees do help us. They're always willing to help and share that information because then it helps us stay current. And that sometimes is some of the best data points if you just grab somebody who just transitioned companies and they send you their information. So
Sure. Yeah, make you stay up to date and competitive. Has there been a time in your career where you've seen an increase in turnover because you were lacking in one area of the benefit offerings that you actually had?
I don't know if I remember it specifically related to benefits, but I'm sure depending on your personal situation, if the
Right.
total package wasn't what you wanted and you have a family or certain needs, then benefits will play a big part in it. And it's important that companies are keeping up with what's progressive and what's trending and just getting people the right stuff because what people need now might be different than what they needed 5 years ago. And I think certain companies, they'll may be really rich in certain perks and certain things, and other companies are rich in healthcare and pay and different things like that. So depends on the industry, I think.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's working
Yeah.
out with your TA group and team to understand, as you had mentioned earlier, what are some of the newer things that folks are offering and staying competitive. But as you said, some people care a lot about PTO and having unlimited, some care more about parental leave, some don't want to pay anything for benefit. So which levers you pull can all be based on employment engagement surveys and communicating well with your current employee population.
Yeah. What type of people you hire? I mean, if you're hiring a lot of entry level folks, like you said, in your 20s, you're probably not thinking about all the different things you need compared to if you're starting a family later on. So,
Right. Yeah.
well, we touched on it a little bit earlier, just when we were talking about busy season for HR. But as we do approach the end of the year, performance reviews, employee reviews are always a big aspect of the responsibilities that you and your team have. From your standpoint, how often should you be doing formal performance reviews? And then even to take it a step further, how often do you recommend managers meeting with their employees for touch bases? Is that weekly? Is that every other week? Just curious to hear what you've seen work on both of those scenarios.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure obviously people should be talking regularly and communicating often about everything that's going on. But I think that there's a business reality to that. So I think the more informal conversation and feedback is great. If it's something that's formal, I'd say quarterly is great, but I think in practice that's ambitious. So I would say biannually and in a formal review, but hopefully ideally you're talking every week or you have team meetings once a month or stand-ups or whatever, where you're going through the activity of the team and what's going on at the customer and your goals. And you're always kind of talking about that as a manager. So it doesn't put all the pressure on those one or two formal touch bases.
Yeah, totally makes sense.
There are ever times where you can't get that hiring manager to actually fill out their performance reviews and you just have to stay on that standpoint?
Yeah, I think that happens to everybody. So even the best programs, there's still a lot of chasing and hand holding and reminding people why it's important and things like that. I'd love to have people checking in formally 4 times a year, but that's why I dialed it back. It's two is more than enough if we're going to do it formally and go through the process. It can be challenging enough to get that done with all the day-to-day work that goes on.
Yeah. And a quarter goes by so quickly. It's like you said, it's important to be having that real time communication feedback, but to do it quarterly, it's 3 months flies by. So
Right. Yeah.
Well, now we'd like to just wrap up with one last question, which is really more of our unfiltered HR question. So, a little bit more uncomfortable out there, not as formal as some of these other ones we've been firing away at you. But if you could hang out with any business leader in the world, who would it be and why?
Yeah. Wow. That's a great question. It doesn't make me as uncomfortable. The other ones were actually harder. So this one takes the pressure off.
Okay.
Perfect. More casual.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if it's anyone specifically, but I think it's so cool. People that are chefs and have restaurants. My favorite show on Netflix is Chef's Table because I love seeing how they create the concept and like the artistic design behind it and then executing and building a restaurant. It just blows my mind. So I wouldn't pick anyone specifically, but I would just say people that can run a business like that would be great to hear their story and learn about their passion and why they do what they do and all that good stuff.
Yeah, love the
And
answer.
my other answer was probably really obvious, which would be Taylor Swift because she's a billionaire. And everything she's done to navigate all the record label issues and like building her tour and everything like that. That would be really cool to just sit down and obviously hang out with her. So I'm pretty low on her list. I don't see that happening.
That's
but
music. That's music to Rosanna's ears. That's for sure. She's a big Swiftie.
You're speaking my language. I feel like so many people could learn a ton from Taylor Swift.
Yeah.
From a business standpoint. The fact that she's
for
done
sure.
what she's done and starting out so young, I could learn a lot from her.
Would that be your answer as well, Ro? If you could hang out with any business owner?
I hadn't thought of that, but yeah, probably.
Yeah. I feel
I
like
love the chef one though too. And I feel like Chicago, like we have so many cool restaurants, like you see some of those people sometimes in their restaurants. And
Yeah.
I love that angle, but I think I'd have to go with Taylor Swift as well.
I asked that question because I always like to be asked that question because I always answer that one as I've always found I'm a big NFL football fan, Chiefs fan. So Taylor Swift, I've somehow embraced that Chiefs Kingdom Nation with that. But I've always wanted to potentially follow a general manager around of one of those NFL teams in terms of, I don't know if you've ever seen the ball, like Moneyball on, I'm not as big of a Major League Baseball fan, but from an NFL perspective, when you have a roster of 53 people, you start with like almost 100 in training camp and dial it down and make acquisitions and whatnot. There's so much that the public population doesn't get to see, and how you fit X amount of dollars within the salary cap. I just have always found that if I could shadow a job where I don't even need to get paid at all, I'd love to do that for just even a day would be just fascinating. But everyone's got their own thing. What about you, Ro?
I think I'm gonna have to follow Daina and say Taylor Swift.
Taylor Swift. Well, that's always the best answer.
Yeah. I think, like you said, her record labels, just even being a star so young and what she's accomplished and how she still is like relatable to most people is very impressive to me. And we're tying it all in with the NFL. So that wraps us up. I love it. Well, Daina, thanks so much for joining us. That is all we have time for today. So thank you to all of our listeners for tuning into this week's episode. This week, we met with Daina Gjemre and discussed her career, HR involvement, specifically within the PE space and mergers and acquisitions, and evaluating the impact and retention of company benefits. We will be back again next month with another new special guest. Quick reminder how you can support our Beyond the Offer podcast. You can find all our content on the HireWell social media platform, which you can find through hirewell.com. Take care, everyone, and thank you for tuning in.